Eric McClung joins us. He's going to help us with the craziness that is Talladega. Just tell us who's going to win, Eric. It's going to be easy.
Very easy. Well, I don't know. You say craziness, but we haven't really seen that in many weeks. So I don't know. Maybe everybody's just being kind of low key and conservative, and then things will be nice and smooth.
Or all hell will break loose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a pretty wide open race. I was just kind of going over some numbers here a few minutes ago, and Denny Hamlin, you don't really think of him as a restrictor plate guy, but he's got, I believe, 3 top 10s in the last 4 at Talladega. His career average running position at the track is among the best, and he's been pretty good over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, he's already won 2 races this season. I think he's maybe a guy that, like I said, you don't really associate him with restrictor plate racing per se, but I think he's a guy who'll be very much in the mix.
Well, one of the guys that we talked about, and we're talking to Eric McClung, and you can follow Eric on Twitter at Eric McClung and read his fantasy racing commentary at kffl.com, and I believe at Fantasy Football Toolbox too. But follow him on Twitter, and you can find all of his stuff. Eric, one of Steve's questions earlier in the day, a Fast Lap question, was about whether or not Junior has done enough this year, Dale Earnhardt Jr., not Martin Truex Jr., has done enough this year to warrant being considered a favorite at Talladega again. Do you think he has, or are you not buying the Junior buzz at this point?
Well, I certainly don't see why not. I think last year, when he was getting good finishes, some of them were maybe a little bit more fluky. If you looked at, where he was running for the majority of the race versus the result he would get at the end, it didn't necessarily correlate. So, maybe he's a bit of an overachiever at times last year. But that hasn't been the case though this year. He's, when he finishes well, he's pretty much run well throughout the race, and he was the runner-up at Daytona. So I certainly don't see why, despite the other Hendrick cars not running well at Daytona, I certainly don't see why he couldn't replicate that and run very well with Talladega, even though despite some good qualifying efforts, he hasn't finished very well at Talladega in the last couple of years.
One of the guys that car owners that has done well there that you don't necessarily think will do well is Phoenix Racing, James Finch, and with Kurt Busch in that car, is he somebody you look at fantasy-wise as being one of those wild card guys who could possibly pick up a win here at Talladega?
Yeah, I mean, if you would have asked me that in the beginning of the season, I probably would have said no way. But he has been pretty good. He had a pretty good showing at Richmond until he ran into some problems, and has been pretty good, surprisingly good at certain points in certain races this season. The nice part with the way this schedule plays out is that there's going to be Friday practice sessions before qualifying on Saturday. So if you play the Yahoo game, and if we're talking fantasy NASCAR, most people do, you can just take a look at what happens, in those Friday practice sessions. And if Kurt Busch is, in the top 15, top 10 on the speed charts, I certainly would not have a problem starting him for the race itself.
Anybody that you like to stay away from at Talladega, per se, that just really has stunk the place up over the years?
Well, 2 guys who I'm very interested to see what they'll do are teammates Juan Pablo Montoya and Jamie McMurray. There was a couple years ago where Jamie McMurray was the man in restrictor plate races, but really hasn't done much the last year, 2 years or so. However, they very quietly have been not so bad the last 2 weeks. Montoya has finished, I believe, 12th in the last 2 races, and McMurray has finished 14th in the last 2 races. So, and if you take a look at what they've done at Talladega, they've kind of sprinkled in some good finishes and some good runs here and there. And being teammates and seeing how they're the guys who kind of employ that strategy where they lay back for the first half of the race and then try to team up and move forward. So those are 2 guys that I think are really intriguing. They could be boom or bust guys that they could do absolutely nothing and kind of ruin your day, or they could be pretty surprising. So those are 2 guys that probably would normally stay away from on a week-by-week basis. But I definitely want to see how they perform in practice because I think there could be some dark horse candidates there.
I know we're a little bit early in the week, but how would you look at your Yahoo lineup for this week, sitting on Tuesday before Talladega?
Well, the A-list I think is pretty fluid. With it being Talladega, you're probably not going to want to, bring out a top guy that you're going to have later on in the year. Meaning a Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart type of guy. I think this is a week where Brad Keselowski could be pretty good. With the top level competition that you're going to have, to compete with every week on the A-list, I don't think Keselowski necessarily is a guy who's going to see a lot of ownership. So I think if you start him and he performs well, I think that'll be a very good value. I mentioned Danny Hamlin, a little bit earlier. He's a guy who, if he performs well in practice, I definitely would give a lot of consideration to. The B-list, I think Clint Boyer is pretty much the no-brainer there. He's got 4 top 10s in a row at Talladega, including 2 wins and a runner-up finish. Now, those were not with his present team; they were with Richard Childress Racing. But with as good as Michael Waltrip Racing has been this season, I don't see why there's going to be any negatives with that change. I mentioned McMurray and Montoya; those are both B-list drivers. Depending on how practice pans out, I may have one or even both of those guys on there. Joey Logano, surprisingly, among all drivers, his career average running position is the best at Talladega. So another guy I think that hasn't been performing well this season, but we've seen in these types of races where guys who haven't been very good in recent weeks will all of a sudden have a good performance just because the style of racing is so completely different. On the C list, Michael Waltrip, I mentioned how good Michael Waltrip Racing has been. Well, Michael Waltrip himself will be racing in this race, and we've seen in this car Mark Martin perform extremely well. Brian Vickers has been very good. So now, hopefully, Waltrip will carry that banner. So I think he's definitely a guy that you want to start in the C list. Trevor Baynes is also on the C list. He's a guy I would also probably have it as a reserve role. See what he does in practice, see what he does in qualifying, and kind of weigh out if you want him or Waltrip. So I think those are the best 2 options you can go with the C list. The rest I think is pretty wide open. Those practice sessions are going to make a big deal. So on my Twitter account, usually I always kind of update that afterwards with who I'm buying, who I'm selling. So it's still a pretty fluid situation.
Again, we're talking to Eric McClung. You follow him on Twitter at Eric McClung, a fantasy racing expert for KFFL.com, along with golf, fantasy golf, and fantasy. What else? What else you doing now, Eric? What else is besides fantasy golf?
Fantasy dodgeball.
Week in and week out, NASCAR and golf are the main 2. I've done. I did some baseball stuff before the season. I've done football off and on the last couple of years. So I've kind of dabbled in just about everything.
Fantasy expert. Okay, I haven't heard you talk much about any of the Ford drivers in this Talladega preview for this weekend. What do you think of the Roush guys and any possibilities there?
Yeah, well, obviously Matt Kenseth won Daytona, so and Roush in general has been pretty good, if not great, just about every week. The problem there is, do you really want to take the risk, given how good a lot of these drivers are on 1.5-mile tracks and other types of intermediate tracks? Do you really want to gamble and then throw them into a kind of a wild card situation at Talladega? Again, if they're really good in practice, then maybe, put one of the Roush guys in there, maybe get some qualifying bonus points or so on. But, as a whole, I would probably not start any of those guys and like I said, keep them for 1.5 miles or some of the other types of tracks. We have Dover coming up pretty soon. Kenseth is very good there, and some of the other Roush guys. So I just wouldn't necessarily take the risk. I think a guy like Keselowski, who most people aren't starting week in and week out on the A-list, I think he's a guy that would make more sense.
All right. Who is your one pick to win?
Well, I would say Keselowski. I think that I just don't think a lot of people are going to be starting him, so I think there's a lot of value there. We've seen him perform pretty well on this track in the past. So I think it certainly could play out with him, but I think it's going to be a pretty wide open, pretty crazy kind of race.
All right, he is Eric McClung. You follow him on Twitter at Eric McClung. Read his fantasy racing stuff at KFFL.com. Eric, thanks again for your time this week. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks. Good luck with your selections at Talladega.
All right, thank you. Take care.
All right, Eric McClung, one of our buddies.
All right.
All right. I see all your notes over there about baseball and everything. Who are you picking for the race?
We're going to do that, or we're going to wait?
Smiley.
I'm taking Drew Smiley for the race. I'm taking Junior.
Oh, yeah?
I really do. I think this is the Junior time. So,
well, I like the Hendrick idea, but I'm taking your buddy Jeff Gordon.
all right. Well, we're going to